What makes a book unforgettable? Is it the power of the ideas inside it? Or is it the order in which those ideas arrive? Because a great non-fiction book does not simply give you useful information. It changes the way your mind receives information. It breaks one belief before it offers another. It removes one mental habit before it installs a better one. And that is exactly why Atomic Habits became more than a best-selling self-help book. It became a book people quote, recommend, underline, revisit, and build routines around. Not simply because James Clear has useful ideas, but because he knows exactly when to introduce each idea and why. That is the real secret of this book. Not just the content, but the construction. Not just the message, but the sequence. Most conversations about Atomic Habits stay on the surface. They ask what Chapter 1 says, what the 4 laws are, what the identity chapter means. But the deeper question is this: why does the book begin there? Why is identity introduced so early? Why are the 4 laws arranged in that exact order? And what would be lost if that order changed? Because Atomic Habits is not just a book about habits. In a strange and impressive way, it is a book built like a habit. It catches your attention. It makes the idea attractive. It lowers friction for understanding. And then it rewards you with clarity. It does not only explain behavior change, it performs behavior change on the reader while they are reading. And once you see that design, the book becomes much more impressive than it first appears. James Clear does something very smart before his real argument even begins. He starts with himself. On the surface, that looks ordinary. Many non-fiction writers begin with a personal story. But here, the placement matters. He could have opened with science. He could have opened with data, brain research, behavioral psychology, or a bold thesis about how small habits shape identity. Instead, he opens with his baseball injury, his physical recovery, and the slow rebuilding of his life through tiny, repeatable actions. Why begin there? Because before a non-fiction writer can persuade you, they have to solve one silent problem: trust. Every reader opens a book with an invisible question in the back of their mind. Why should I listen to you? Clear answers that question before he asks for your attention, and he does not answer it by sounding brilliant. He answers it by sounding lived in. That opening story does not just give him credibility, it changes the emotional tone of the book. He is no longer speaking like a lecturer standing above the subject. He is speaking like someone who had to use these ideas under pressure. Someone who did not arrive at habits through theory alone, but through necessity. That matters, because Atomic Habits is trying to reach readers who are often carrying private shame. People come to a book like this thinking some version of the same thing. I know what I should do, so why can't I do it? A personal opening softens that shame. It tells the reader that this is not a book that will judge them. It is a book that understands the gap between knowing and doing. Anatomy note: this opening is not there mainly to inspire you. It is there to lower your resistance. Before James Clear teaches the reader anything, he first makes himself believable. Structurally, the personal story is not decoration, it is trust building. Now look at what comes next. A weaker self-help book would move directly into advice. Wake up earlier, track your habits, remove distractions, build consistency. But Atomic Habits does not begin with methods, it begins with scale. It teaches the reader how to think about change itself. That is why the early chapters focus so heavily on tiny improvements, compounding effects, and the idea that small habits matter more than people think. Why put that first? Because the reader's biggest problem is not laziness, it is impatience. Most people do not fail at habits because they are incapable of doing small things. They fail because they do small things for a short time, see no visible result, and assume nothing is happening. James Clear understands that if he does not correct the reader's time horizon first, then every practical technique in the rest of the book will be misunderstood. The reader will treat the methods as quick fixes, try them for a week, and then quit when life does not transform immediately. So before he gives the reader a system, he changes the speed at which the reader expects results. That is why the compounding argument arrives early. It is not just a useful idea, it is a calibration device. It teaches the reader to stop measuring progress on the wrong timeline. In other words, the opening chapters are not mainly about habits, they are about expectation management. This is also why the goals versus systems argument appears so early. A lot of readers come into a self-improvement book with a familiar mindset. Set better goals, want it more, be more disciplined, be more ambitious. Clear does not reinforce that mindset. He quietly dismantles it. He moves the reader away from achievement thinking and toward process thinking. That move has to happen early, because if the reader still believes goals are the center of transformation, then everything after this will be interpreted through the wrong lens. Habit tracking will become a sprint tool. Identity will feel like branding. The 4 laws will sound like a performance strategy. By attacking goal obsession near the beginning, Clear clears space for a different operating system. These chapters are not simply giving information, they are uninstalling a worldview. Anatomy note: the first major chapters are not there to explain habits. They are there to reset the reader's expectations. Clear first breaks the fantasy of dramatic change and the mythology of goals. Only then can the real framework land. Then comes the most important structural decision in the entire book: identity. Not methods, not science, not mechanics. Identity. This is the moment Atomic Habits stops being just another productivity book. Once Clear has loosened the reader's attachment to goals, he faces a dangerous gap. If goals are not the center, then what is? If the reader is no longer supposed to ask, "What do I want to achieve?" then what question should replace it? That is exactly where the identity chapter enters. This is not accidental placement. It is strategic replacement. Clear does not leave the reader floating in uncertainty. He replaces one center with another. Not goals, but identity. Not outcomes, but becoming. Not what do you want, but who do you believe you are. And this chapter has to arrive here, before the mechanics. Because without identity, the rest of the book becomes procedural. Useful, yes. Effective, maybe. But emotionally thin. The identity chapter gives meaning to everything that follows. Once the reader accepts that every action is a vote for the kind of person they want to become, habits stop feeling like chores and start feeling like evidence. That one shift changes the emotional temperature of the whole book. A walk is no longer just a walk. It becomes a vote for being a healthy person. Reading one page is no longer tiny progress. It becomes proof of being a reader. Tidying one room is no longer a small task. It becomes evidence of becoming organized. Without this chapter, the 4 laws would still be practical, but they would feel like tactics. Identity is what gives them depth. It also solves another structural problem. Earlier, Clear explained that results take time, but delayed results are psychologically hard to sustain. Identity offers a more immediate reward. Even when external change is invisible, internal identity can still be reinforced. You may not look different yet, but you can already become the kind of person who shows up. That is why this chapter belongs here. It turns future-based motivation into present-based meaning. Anatomy note: the identity chapter is not just a good idea placed early. It is the emotional anchor of the whole book. Without it, the rest of the framework would work mechanically, but not deeply. This chapter gives the system a soul. Only after all of that does James Clear explain the habit loop: cue, craving, response, reward. On paper, this looks like the science section, but structurally, it is more important than that. It is the hinge of the book. The early chapters changed the reader's mindset. They reframed change, weakened goal thinking, and introduced identity. But the reader still needs one more thing: a map. A way to look at behavior not as personality, but as sequence. That is what the habit loop provides. And again, the timing matters. If Clear had introduced this model at the very beginning, it might have felt dry. Informative maybe, but detached. A framework before the reader cared enough to use it. By placing it here, after the philosophical and emotional groundwork has been laid, the loop becomes more than theory. it becomes a lens. The reader can now look at their own life and ask, what is the cue here? What craving is hiding behind this behavior? What reward keeps this pattern alive? This chapter also has another vital structural function. It justifies the entire second half of the book. Because once the loop exists, the four laws no longer feel like a random list. They feel inevitable. Make it obvious connects to the cue. Make it attractive connects to the craving. Make it easy connects to the response. Make it satisfying connects to the reward. That order is not memorable because it sounds neat. It is memorable because it follows the natural order of behavior itself. And this raises an important question. What if the order were different? What if make it easy came before make it obvious? Then the book would talk about reducing friction before establishing triggers. But if a behavior is not reliably cued, making it easier does not solve the core problem. What if make it satisfying came first? Then reward would be emphasized before action had a stable trigger or emotional pull. The chain would weaken. So the four laws are not arranged for style. They are arranged for causality. Anatomy note. The habit loop chapter is the bridge between philosophy and method. It takes abstract ideas about change and turns them into a visible structure. Without this chapter, the four laws would feel like tips. With it, they feel like a behavioral system. Now we enter the main engine of the book, the four laws. But even here, the design is more thoughtful than people often realize. Clear does not introduce one law and immediately move on. He gives each law space, several chapters, several angles, several examples. That matters because a principle this simple can be misunderstood if it is delivered too quickly. So instead of explaining each law once, he expands each one in layers. Take the first law, make it obvious. At the surface, this is about visibility. But structurally, the first law is doing something much bigger. It is shifting the reader's understanding of responsibility. Most people think failed habits are a moral issue. I am inconsistent. I have no discipline. I lack self-control. But the first law slowly redirects blame away from character and toward architecture. It begins with awareness, then moves into implementation intentions, then habit stacking, then environment design. That sequence matters. First, the reader is taught to notice behavior, then to specify behavior, then to attach behavior, then to shape space itself. It is a movement from internal observation to external design. This is one reason the first law gets so much space. Clear is not just teaching readers to remember their habits. He is teaching them to stop treating habits as a test of virtue. The environment is no longer neutral. It becomes an active force. That is a major psychological shift, and it had to happen before any discussion of attraction or ease, because the book first needs the reader to see habits not as mysterious failures of discipline, but as behaviors living inside a visible structure. Anatomy note. The first law is not just about seeing the habit. It is about teaching the reader that behavior is shaped by cues, context, and space. Structurally, this section moves responsibility away from self-blame and toward design awareness. The second law, make it attractive, comes next for a reason. Once a cue exists, the next question is obvious. Why move toward it? This is where many habit systems fail. They assume that once something is visible, it will happen. But awareness does not guarantee desire. A trigger without emotional pull is just information. So Clear turns to attraction. But look at how he builds this section. He does not frame motivation as heroic willpower. He frames it as designable. Anticipation, temptation bundling, social influence, belonging, imitation. All of these ideas work together to send one quiet message. Desire is not magic. It can be shaped. That matters more than it first appears. Many people read self-help while privately believing that successful people must simply feel more motivated. Clear attacks that belief by explaining attraction as something structural. Rewards can be paired. Communities can normalize behaviors. Environments can make certain actions feel more appealing. This section had to come after the first law because visibility creates the opening, but attraction creates the pull. First, the book teaches you how the behavior enters your field of attention. Then it teaches you how it gains emotional weight once it gets there. Anatomy note. The second law is not there to inspire the reader. It is there to demystify motivation. Structurally, it answers the question that naturally follows visibility. Once the cue appears, what makes the brain lean toward it? Then comes the third law. Make it easy. This may be the most practical section in the book, but it only works because of everything that came before it. If the 2-minute rule had appeared in the opening chapters, many readers would dismiss it. Read one page, put on running shoes, open the notebook. That sounds almost too small, too obvious, too simplistic. But here, after the book has already established compounding, identity, cue, craving, and behavioral sequencing, these tiny actions suddenly feel profound. Not because they are large, but because their role is now clear. The third law is where the book quietly teaches the reader something uncomfortable. Most people do not fail because they choose the wrong goal. They fail because they build a starting point that is too heavy to repeat. So this section reduces friction, and the sequence inside this section matters too. First, Clear explains why repetition matters more than perfection. Then he lowers the entry threshold. Then he shows how environment and automation can make repetition more likely. This is not random advice. It is a controlled descent from complexity to simplicity. The deeper message of the third law is that consistency should not depend on daily heroism. If a habit requires too much energy to begin, then its future is already fragile. That is why this law belongs after attraction. Once the reader understands why a behavior matters and why it feels desirable, the next obstacle is effort. The emotional barrier becomes a mechanical barrier, and the book follows that logic exactly. Anatomy note. The third law does not teach laziness, it teaches repeatability. Structurally, this section takes a motivated reader and removes the friction that would otherwise destroy momentum. The fourth law, make it satisfying, closes the loop. And this is where the architecture becomes especially elegant. Because the book began by telling the reader a difficult truth. Good habits often take time to show visible results. That creates a psychological problem. Human beings are not naturally designed to stay loyal to behaviors that only pay off in the distant future. So the fourth law acts as a compensation mechanism. If the real reward is delayed, then the system must create a smaller, more immediate sense of completion in the present. That is why this section includes habit tracking, streaks, accountability, and consequence design. These are not productivity decorations. They are psychological bridges. They help the present self stay engaged long enough for the future reward to arrive. And again, this section had to come last. If tracking came too early, the reader would start chasing metrics instead of identity. If reward came before cue, attraction, and ease, then the behavior would be reduced to external reinforcement. But when satisfaction comes last, it seals a behavior that is already structured correctly. That is why this section feels like closure. The sequence has reached its natural end. Trigger, desire, action, reinforcement. Anatomy note. The fourth law is not just about feeling good after a habit. It is the book's answer to delayed gratification. Structurally, it closes the motivational gap that the earlier chapters intentionally opened. Now step back and look at the 4 laws as a whole. They are not just 4 principles. They are 4 stages of entry into behavior. And more interestingly, they mirror the experience of reading the book itself. First, the book captures your attention. Then it makes the ideas appealing. Then it explains them simply enough to use. Then it rewards you with clarity and completion. In that sense, Atomic Habits does not just describe behavioral design. It models it. That may be one reason the book spreads so effectively by word of mouth. It is not only useful, it is structurally smooth. It creates low friction for understanding. It gives frequent reward through short chapters, concrete examples, and clean summaries. It is, in its own way, a habit-shaped reading experience. Anatomy note. The 4 laws are not just the content of the book. They are the skeleton of the book. Their order matters because it reflects the natural order of human behavior. Change the order, and the logic weakens. But perhaps the most mature part of the book is what happens after the framework is already complete. James Clear does not stop when the system is built. He keeps going, and that matters. A less careful writer would end the book right after the 4 laws. By then, the reader has enough tools to feel helped. But Clear adds something that gives the book more seriousness. He begins to deal with long-term reality, boredom, plateaus, talent fit, reflection, review. Why place these ideas late? Because these are not starting problems. These are staying problems. In the beginning, readers want momentum. They want possibility. They want a framework that makes change feel achievable. If you start too early with boredom, genetic constraints, or long-term review, you risk draining the emotional energy of the book. But once the reader already has a system, these later chapters perform a different function. They prevent simplification. They quietly say, yes, systems matter, but systems still live inside real life. Real life includes boredom, repetition, mismatch, drift, blind spots. This is one reason Atomic Habits feels more honest than many books in its category. It does not pretend that once you understand habits, change becomes easy forever. It acknowledges that maintenance is its own discipline. The boredom chapter is especially well placed. Early in the book, the reader is inspired. Later in the book, the reader is ready for something harder. The truth that professionals are often distinguished not by passion, but by their ability to continue through monotony. That is a deeper truth than motivation. And the final emphasis on reflection and review gives the whole book intellectual maturity. Habits are useful, but habits can also become automatic. Automatic can become blind. So the system must be revisited. That ending matters because it keeps the book from becoming simplistic. It says this is not a magic formula. It is a living structure. Anatomy note: the later chapters are not extra material. They protect the book from naive optimism. Structurally, they turn a practical system into a long-term philosophy of maintenance. So what is the real architecture of Atomic Habits? At the highest level, the book moves in 3 large phases. First, it breaks old beliefs. Second, it installs a new framework. Third, it stabilizes that framework against real life. That is why it works so well. It does not rush to advice. It prepares the mind for advice. It does not throw methods at the reader. It teaches the reader how to interpret methods. It does not end with excitement. It ends with realism. That sequence is everything. Because transformation is not just about what you learn. It is about what your mind is ready to receive, and when. And that may be the deepest lesson of Atomic Habits, beyond habits themselves. Change has an order. You cannot build consistency before reducing friction. You cannot rely on goals before questioning identity. You cannot expect discipline while living inside a badly designed environment. You cannot ask for long-term repetition without some form of short-term reward. In other words, the book is not only teaching the reader how habits work, it is teaching the reader how change itself must be constructed. That is what makes Atomic Habits more than a popular self-help title. It is a carefully sequenced piece of behavioral writing. Its power is not only in the truth of its ideas, but in the order of their arrival. And maybe that is why the book stays with people. Because it does not merely hand you a better routine, it hands you a better way to think about becoming. This is the book line. And in the next video, we go deeper into the ideas themselves. Not the structure this time, but the psychology inside it. Identity, systems, goals, plateaus, the Goldilocks rule. And why this book understands human behavior better than most books in its category. Until then, ask yourself one question. Are you struggling to change because you do not know enough? Or because you are trying to change in the wrong order? That question may matter more than any habit you track this week.